My name is David Carrico, and in the early 1990s, my wife Donna was doing some volunteer work with a group called SLAM. It was an acronym for Society's League Against Molestation. And Rick and Pam Doniger were also working with SLAM, and children began to disclose to Rick that they were being abused ritually and satanically. And one child come forward and one child become two and on. And these children were telling the story that they were being taken by school officials to a certain blue house where they were being exposed to satanic rituals involving sexual abuse, animal, and even human sacrifice. And this was just something that was just, it was staggering. It was enough to really set you back. It boggled the mind to even grasp that such a thing could be happening.
Through the years, we've had thousands of testimonies of people that have called us and shared their stories about what's been done to them.
When I was 8 years old, they would take me out of school, and the principal would take us out of class and tell the teacher that they're taking us to a special program to learn. And when they took us to this blue house. We never got justice. The prosecutor wouldn't prosecute the case despite all the people that were telling the same story. My family was horrified. We didn't want to tell anybody because they told us that if we told them, we could get in trouble too because of all the things that we did, but we were only kids.
My name is Rick Doninger, and I'm from here in Evansville, Indiana. Back in the early 90s, my wife Pam and I were involved in an organization that was a volunteer organization that assisted victims of child sexual abuse. And my wife was doing advocacy work for them and doing kind of a court monitoring program. And one of the reasons she got involved in this was because we saw in Vanderburgh County that there was a common theme in the sexual abuse cases where alleged perpetrators were arrested and tried. If convicted, they were usually let go if their cases in fact resulted in a prosecution. If more often than not, cases were not prosecuted, and what we were seeing were victims coming forward talking about being molested and stuff, and it was kind of a revolving door system. The prosecutor's office just flat refused to take any action on it. It was a mystery.
I'm not going to prosecute. No. I don't believe the allegation. You don't believe the proven, you don't believe this story? I don't believe this particular story. If the system isn't going to be able to help these children, where would this address these parents go? I don't know. That means not to prosecute.
Levco was a prosecutor that was here during the time that we dealt with the Blue House case. And I just did a really quick search. I was really surprised to find this, but Levco still practices law here. It says, this is from a news article from the Courier and Press here. It was December 25th, 2010. And it says, law remains Stan Levco's love. Outgoing prosecutor reflects on his tenure. Well, he talks about some of the cases that he dealt with in here, but the thing that caught my eye was the part about the Blue House in Evansville. It was very upsetting when I read this because it says here, in 1991, during his first year as prosecutor, Levco faced public pressure to pursue an investigation into allegations of satanic abuse of children. It was alleged that a school official was removing the children from schools and taking them to a blue house on Franklin Street, where they were molested during satanic rituals. A furor over such ritual abuse of children was gripping the county at the time, and the case drew national attention. But for months, Levco steadfastly refused to sign a search warrant, citing the Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable search and seizure. Police searched the house only after receiving residents' permission and found no evidence of a cult. It's one of the things I'm proud of. A lot of people were clamoring for me to issue a search warrant. I knew this wasn't going on there, and I wasn't about to issue a warrant, he said. Levco noted such examples illustrate his feelings about his career. He was proud of the fact that he did not prosecute these children's cases. I would not be proud of that if there was even this much of a chance that one of those children was telling the truth.
Our attorney, Mr. William Welborn, he donated his time to represent all of these kids that wanted representation by an attorney. And he took on the cases for free. And he had talked to the children, he talked to the mothers, and he was convinced that these kids were telling the truth.
First of all, the fact that there are so many children who are telling very similar stories. It is inconceivable to me that children who do not know one another, children who do not go to the same school, the same daycare, the same church, there's no common thread there. The second thing is that there is similar evidence of physical abuse in a number of these children. They have been injured, damaged in the same way.
And he was a very, very brilliant attorney here locally who had worked in the prosecutor's office. He was very well respected. His father was a judge way back in the day of the KKK, and his dad was instrumental in bringing down the Klan in this place in Evansville way back in his day. And so for Mr. Welborn to take this on, it was kind of he was kind of doing his generational thing, fighting the evil too. His son had told me after his suicide that he had been threatened. His office had been broken into on more than one occasion. His house had been broken into. There were a lot of steps that had been taken. Once we began to be public about this, there were a lot of things done to try to discourage us. And Mr. Welborn ended up, the whole thing, I don't know how much it had to do with his suicide, but he paid a dear price for standing up for these kids and going against a system that was pretty powerful.
Because the children were saying things of such a magnitude that it would involve the institution of the school corporation, and it would involve some cooperation in part of law enforcement. And it was an amazing scenario that they were saying. Yet this was being said by as many of a dozen children that did not know one another. The parents did not know one another, and they were telling consistent stories.
They would do different kind of things to you that you don't do to nobody, and they would have people take turns with you, and that would be a reward.
Few people, if any, in Britain have counselled as many victims of satanic abuse or Satanists themselves as Ray Wire has. If there is an expert on satanic cults, it would have to be him.
How do those children know? How do those children able to describe rituals, to talk about ceremonies, to talk about sacrificing animals? How do those children know?
Nightmares, imagining it.
You can't imagine those things at 3 and 4 years old, and you also don't have the evidence of anal sex abuse and oral sex abuse and all that other abuse that clearly those children have experienced and endured.
And they literally started coming out of the woodwork.
Many of the children here told us that they were put in cages. And I had an 8-year-old girl tell me that her job was to wrap up the body parts so they would put them in a freezer and they could use them in rituals later. And a 4-year-old boy, we tried to help. I remember he looked at us and he was so full of demonic spirits because of what had been done to him. And his father had done it to him, and he says, "I like what my daddy does."
And it eventually went from 1 child to 2 to 3 to 10, and eventually there was a dozen children that came forward. Now all these kids come forward, and we contacted the authorities. Most of the kids had been displaying symptoms of abuse, symptoms of sexual abuse to their parents, and the parents had called the police and called the welfare department and reported that their child was telling them they were being victimized in some way or another. And one after another, each case had been deemed by the authorities as unsubstantiated. Just repeatedly, the abuse was ruled unsubstantiated. There was never enough evidence. So one of the children that had come forward with her mother, she had told a story of how she was placed on a table by the same school principal that the first child had told about from the same school. And she said that she was taken to a blue house and she was placed on a table and that she had a knife stuck inside her. So we had secured an attorney for this child and mother, and since the system, the Child Welfare Department and the police had already deemed this case, unsubstantiated, there was no point in going back to them. So we had the mother take the child to the hospital, and we set up an examination called a colposcopic examination, where they take a camera and they put inside the child and they photograph the vaginal walls and things. And as a result of that, her allegations of abuse and having the knife put in her were substantiated. There were in fact scarring inside the child that substantiated her story of being cut with a knife. And this child had alleged that the school principal had done this.
Sue Donaldson, who is professor of psychology at the University of Southern Indiana, she publicly made the statement on the current affair video that she had examined 6 of the children and that they all were cut. They were all cut ritualistically, and they were marked.
When I saw the first child, I wondered whether or not it was self-inflicted. But as I saw the second child, and the third child, and the fourth child, and the fifth child, and the sixth child, and they all had these scars in the same places, and they all said that they were cut at the Blue House by the school official who had removed them from school.
As Mr. Carrico had said, a lot of the kids were interviewed by a psychology professor from USI who believed the allegations. She said that it was obvious to her that these kids had experienced trauma, and she didn't know exactly how it came about or what, but they were obviously traumatized severely.
It's a matter of record.
Do you get frustrated with people who just won't accept that these things do happen?
Yes, because I've worked with murderers in prisons for years. Not that long ago, a boy was found in a forest in southern England without a head. We have no doubts that men can do that. And yet when we start talking about men within Satanism who actually believe in evil and it's the right to express evil, we suddenly have a doubt.